Okay, we're going to get started with our last panel for today. If you could please find your seat. Thank you. All right, everyone. It's time for our final panel of the day, a forward-looking session titled The Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health, Bridging the Gap Through Innovation and Collaboration. This discussion will explore the crucial steps needed to transform our mental health care system, focusing on healing and recovery. Leading this important conversation as both chair and speaker is Dr. Tom Insel. Dr. Insel is the psychiatrist, neuroscientist, and former director of the National Institute of Mental Health. He has been a leading voice in reimagining how science, technology, and community can transform mental health care, and is the author of Healing, Our Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tom Insel.
Wow, what a day this has been. This has really been great, and delighted to be part of it. Laura, thanks for that introduction. We're going to sort of round out the day by talking about a few other issues connected to what you've been hearing, but kind of now making the jump into talking about healthcare itself. If it's helpful, I'm going to just take 3 minutes and sort of provide some context remarks. And I could have done this at the beginning of the day, but maybe it's even better to do it towards the end of the day here. When we think about this field of mental health, we often start talking about mental health care as soon as we talk about mental health. They're different, but broadly, there's sort of 4 what I'll call buckets in this landscape that are worth knowing about. The first, which is what we talk about most often, particularly in the precision world, is about diagnosis. And there are lots of ways to cut that, whether it's through symptoms or physiological signs like imaging that we've seen, laboratory tests. Also important to know about social context. SDOH is the social determinants of health, which are super important for understanding diagnosis. And maybe most important, but often least collected, are measures of function and how somebody's actually doing, because we know there's a very poor correlation between the intensity of symptoms and the ability to function. Some people with severe symptoms still manage to go to work, and some with very modest symptoms are really disabled. Treatment is the next bucket, which we've talked about quite a bit today, right? It's certainly important to think about not only what the options are, but how they come together. And I listed 5 of them, or 4 of them here, but what I mostly want to stress is the importance of thinking about combinations. We know enough in this field to say 2 things. A, we have treatments that really work, and B, there's no magic bullet, that generally the best outcomes are by combining the treatments that we have. The 2 things we haven't talked as much about that I really want to stress are the importance of setting. And for behavioral health, there are now more settings than ever. And the conversations we've had about AI have raised the whole possibility that this is a do-it-yourself operation as well, and that it's not even clear when and how there will be a human in the loop much of the time. So it's a really interesting moment to think about what is the future of this field going to look like. I'd like to say that AI for mental health could be what DNA was for cancer, really fully transformative of diagnosis and treatment, and changing the field entirely. The part that I most wanted to stress is actually the last column, because we haven't talked much about it. Nolan Williams mentioned this, and it was a really, for me, when I saw his presentation, I thought, going from 6 weeks of treatment to 6 hours, that's pretty interesting in terms of the impact it can have for the actual care system. And the care system in the United States is fundamentally a payment system. So if you want to understand what gets done and how things get translated into care, you have to follow the money. You have to understand what's getting paid for. In this country, fundamentally, if it isn't paid for, it's not going to be adopted, it's not going to be delivered, it's not going to be accessible. And if there's one thing I've learned in 10 years now through 5 startups in the mental health space, probably the most important thing I've learned is that you really have to know who's going to pay for it. It's a question I never asked when I was at NIMH in 13 years and probably $20 billion worth of funding to grants. I don't think we ever asked our grantees, well, if this works, who's going to pay for it? And yet it's really the fundamental question when you think about healthcare, because it is ultimately a transactional piece of this. You could have something really spectacular, but unless it's paid for, it's not going to be delivered. So when I think about these 4 buckets, I think where we're going is for each of them to develop something that's critical that we don't have yet. Precision, certainly for diagnosis, changing the goal of treatment to be around recovery, not just symptom relief, but recovery. And that's what that book I wrote is about. Setting the key here is engagement. And I'll say more about that in just a moment. And then for payment, really defining what is value, something that, by the way, the mental health space has failed to do. Still, there's no consensus about what should be paid for at this point. Just want to quickly make a couple more comments, and then I want to turn this over to the rest of the panel. But I often talk about these sort of inconvenient truths in the mental health space in a way that, for those of you who aren't really in this field, it is fundamentally different than what you would see in cardiovascular medicine, in oncology, in studies with diabetes. I mean, we're really talking about a different world in 3 particular ways. One is that we have a diagnostic system here, so that first bucket is not really connected to the other 3 in any serious way. And that is a huge problem. Now, I'm not trying to pick on the DSM. DSM actually is agnostic to treatment response. It says that in the very first page of the preface of the book, these are categories that were developed without looking at treatment response. One might ask, why would you do that? Because in most of medicine, we try to make the diagnosis relevant to treatment, but in this case, it hasn't been done. And so there's a lot of work to do in this precision space to try to fill that in. It's even, one could say that the purpose of that diagnostic manual is for reimbursement, but it's not even particularly effective for that. The second point, and it's one that's really painful to talk about, is the biggest issue we face in the mental health world in terms of care is that for lots of reasons, people don't buy what we sell. That we have a really massive problem around engagement. More than half the people who should be in care and could be in care and would benefit from care are not. And this is really different than what you'd see in heart disease or in cancer, particularly because in those other parts of medicine, the sicker you are, the more likely you're going to be in care. In mental health, it's just the opposite. So people with mild to moderate disorders might be seeking care at a very high rate. Those with the most severe disorders are running away from care and avoiding it at all costs. That's a hard problem to solve, but it's one that we have to solve if we want to really have an impact. And the third point is that very few patients in our world are involved in research. Now, virtually every pediatric cancer patient in the United States is in a protocol of some sort. And I can tell you that virtually no pediatric mental health patients are in any protocol of any sort. That's a problem for us, and it's a problem that we need to solve if we're going to make progress. We have to be able to connect the worlds. It's sort of interesting to me that we're having this great conversation in this room with so many brilliant people here at Stanford, but Stanford's also a healthcare system with tens of thousands of patients, and the healthcare system is not really in this room. And I think a challenge for us and an opportunity for us is to begin to invite the healthcare system to feed and to work with and collaborate with the academic medical center in a way that benefits everybody. So I've been involved with, and I'm just going to take a moment to say this, with a new entity, it's a public benefit corporation called Benchmark, right now just in Massachusetts, working mostly with Harvard. But what we're trying to do is to fix a bunch of those problems by creating a different kind of care system that's all based on every individual looking for mental health care, getting an advocate. In this case, it's a licensed social worker with a lot of AI agents on the side who help that person to find the very best care. Usually it's online, sometimes it's offline, coordinates that care, and they stay with the person all the way through the journey. They're not just an advocate, they're a Sherpa, and they measure outcomes, and they use those outcomes to actually generate what we're calling a precision navigation tool that's based on seeing how thousands and tens of thousands of people are responding to the interventions that are out there and learning as we go. It is a learning health system, and it's one that I think is a model for how this can be done. What we're going to do in the next few minutes is to hear from some experts who are thinking about each part of this. So we'll start with Bill Martin, who's going to help us think about getting to the diagnostic precision that we need. Then from Anna Gatti, who's going to talk about how do we actually get the adoption of innovation into healthcare. And then finally, and I'm really excited about this, we have Brandon Staglin with us to talk about how do we involve patients in research? How do we get not like less than 10%, but more than 90% of people who become our partners in research? So we'll start with Bill Martin. Bill is the Global Therapeutic Head of Neuroscience at J&J. I'd like to point out that in this last 20 years, when almost every pharmaceutical company has left the study of mental illness and the development of drugs for mental illness, J&J may be the lone exception to that rule. They have stayed the course all the way through. Bill leads that effort for discovery and development of a precision neuroscience pipeline, transformative treatments for neuropsychiatric and neurodegenerative disorders. Bill has a broad experience. Some of you will have known of his work at Blackthorn Therapeutics, where he was president and CEO. It was a company that was acquired a few years ago by Neurawell Therapeutics. He previously worked at Theravance and at Merck, where he was shaping the neuroscience franchise. He's active in the brain health community, serving on the advisory council for Brown University's Carney Institute and the National Academy's Forum on Neuroscience and Neurosystem Disorder within the National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. He's a founding board member of the Alliance for AI and Healthcare, authored more than 80 peer-reviewed articles. Bill, thanks so much for joining us.
So humble to be here. Thank you, Tom, for that introduction, and thank you to the organizers for including me. You know, as I started the day, I thought, oh, well, this is going to be fantastic. Surely no one will cover the content that I'm going to cover. And then, of course, throughout the day, everything that's in my slides has been covered. So for those who have been here throughout the day and feel like maybe a good recap was necessary, consider my opportunity with my talk. For those who don't need that recap, take 10 minutes to get a little nap. Your brain probably needs it. So I want to talk about the promise of precision neuroscience. And this is an example of what you would have seen before. By now, you recognize the heterogeneity that we're talking about in many of these categorical diagnoses of serious mental illnesses, conventional approaches. You've heard about trial and error. The promise of the precision approach is that we can develop treatments or identify treatments that take into account features of the patients and their disease. And I think this is an important statement. We're often talking about going from disorders to diseases. And by that, we mean that there's underlying biology that's governing the dysregulated behavior. And the idea is that through the advances in biomarker discovery, would say data science, which is both ML and AI, and clinical trial innovation, maybe we can move toward these more precise therapies. And this is not to say that experience as medicine is not a viable possibility. It is. It's not to say that we shouldn't look at non-pharmaceutical approaches, neuromodulatory approaches. We should do that as well. But I do humbly submit that we do not simply have a matching problem. We do not have enough pharmacological diversity to address the array of symptom challenges, symptom domain dysregulations that we're seeing. So part of what we've been trying to do, thank you for recognizing, Tom, I inherited this legacy. Johnson & Johnson has had a continuous commitment to neuroscience, medicine discovery and development for 70 years, 7 decades. And it continues through the setting of a lot of failure. What we're trying to do is actually now establish, with this revolution in AI and ML, new framework for thinking about pharmaceutical development. So this is that why, and Tom mentioned this as well. I do think we have a problem here. It's a marketing problem, if you will. When you're talking about major depressive disorder, as we heard a little bit today, these are diseases that are potentially fatal and left untreated will lead to death. And many of us have experienced this firsthand. For that, I'm sorry for all of you. But this is not the way we approach the problem. We approach the problem thinking about, well, we just need to sort of start treatment, and then we're going to hope for some response, and then that response is going to be sufficient. And the reason why we're in a trial and error paradigm is because, frankly, it's not that expensive. It's not that expensive to use generic medicines, and we'll go from one to the other and we'll monitor. But it's very expensive if you think about the life-threatening aspect of failure. So part of the systematic shift is to say the promise of precision is not just in getting the right treatments to the right patients at the right time. That's, of course, true. The opportunity is saying that the residual symptoms that are present after sort of a primary treatment, they tell us something about the biology that's being unaddressed. And if we can learn more about that biology, I've talked about some of the sources of residual symptoms, anhedonia, this inability to experience pleasure from things that should provide joy, sleep disruption, anxiety, fatigue, you'll know all these things. The question is, can we identify those underlying elements, those domains, their biology that's governing that, and actually come up with better ways, new ways of treating these symptoms. So this is something that maybe you haven't seen, but I think does put into the context everything that you've heard about today. And I think it's really useful because we talk about AI, we talk about diagnostics and prognostics, but do we really talk about how we connect one to the other to arrive at a ground truth, to arrive at the disease within the disorder, the biology that's governing the behavioral dysregulation? So one way to think about this, you've heard a lot about brain measures. I think that is a ground truth, functional imaging, EEG. We've talked about clinical symptoms. They will always be there. This is actually probably going to be our guiding force. And there were questions, but we haven't talked too much about fluid measures. And you can think about each of these sort of sides of the triangle, the linkage of clinical symptoms to brain biology as giving mechanistic insights into these diseases. You can think about the relationship between brain measures and fluid measures as a way of maybe more simply getting to a diagnostic that's truly scalable. With all due respect, when you talk about 25 million people in the US and hundreds of million people across the world, which is where we're trying to develop our therapies, we need something that truly is scalable. And the last part is, of course, linking those clinical symptoms, to, for example, the fluid measures, to a diagnostic measure that can give us the confidence to proceed. So what we've done, and in the most part, we're focused on developing medicines, but in some cases, I noted the clinical trial innovation, we have to embrace and sometimes develop technologies to support that. So I'm giving you this 3 examples done alone or in collaboration. The one is this reward learning application. This is basically a gamified system inspired by Adam many years ago. Hey, could we actually index the brain and brain circuitry related to anhedonia, simply by developing a task. You're a ranger, you're going to actually, quantify the number of red parrots and blue parrots. And of course, there's a bias in there in terms of reward, and we're able to detect reward learning differences and show that those correlate to the symptoms of anhedonia. That's one of the examples we've included in one of our trials. The other is one that you also saw presented earlier today, the emotional processing bias task. This is using at facial recognition. And the critical part here is, how can we actually more simply and reliably recognize this emotional bias dysregulation within the context of testing novel pharmacology? And that's something that we have deployed in one of our trials currently as well. New pharmacology, muscarinic M1 receptor antagonist, looking at a rapidly acting response to symptom relief. And then the last one is sleep monitoring, where EEG, you can do it lots of different ways. We've done it various different ways. Here, highlighting one that this is the sort of now with Beacon Technologies, trying to have a scalable EEG solution to get to the sleep aspect. I'm going to spend some time, last couple of minutes I have just on this. As you know, 80% of patients who have depression actually suffer from sleep disturbances. And those disturbances, even when you correct the sleep, you don't correct the depression. However, we know that at a brain circuitry level, work done actually here at Stanford some time ago, has linked the orexinergic system and the brain circuits there to not just the regulation of mood, but to the regulation of sleep. And we've shown with one of our selective orexin 2 receptor antagonists, seltorexant, that in fact, you can reduce the symptoms of depression in an adjunctive setting. That means they're already on background SSRI, SNRI therapy, and show only in those with depression and insomnia symptoms do you improve with a orexin 2 receptor antagonist. Otherwise, the treatment looks just like background. So this is an example of developing the measures to develop the new medicines to advance the concept of precision. I will end here because and Tom, the last thing I thought, well, certainly no one's going to cover this, but Tom has covered this beautifully. We have to begin when we think about, from the conventional approach to the precision approach, between here and there's a lot of there to go. And you have to begin with the end in mind and really work backwards. So we think really simply, I've used this in the context of the seltorexant and insomnia within the setting of depression. You think not only about approval, but also about access. Will someone pay for this because it's sufficiently differentiated, addresses a problem? And then ultimately, adoption. Can the healthcare system actually incorporate this into the overall path? And with recent experience we and others have seen in the world of Alzheimer's disease, by the way, the adoption component cannot be underestimated. So even when you achieve new disease-modifying therapies, new fluid-based measures for diagnosis, it does not mean physicians will adopt them, even if payers pay for them. So with that, I will yield my time and look forward to the panel.
Thank you, Bill. The next remarks are from Anna Gatti, who's the co-founder and CEO of Etsira, pioneering precision mental health startup dedicated to advancing psychiatric care through the integration of neuroimaging and AI. And that is what she's going to talk to us about. A bunch of you will know Dr. Gatti. She did her postdoc here at Stanford. I actually met her right after she left Stanford and she went to WHO, the first economist to work at WHO in the mental health space. And she was there at a really interesting time in Geneva, where she built the sort of socioeconomic evidence to drive policy innovation in mental health. She came back to Silicon Valley just maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe a little more than that, and has been in a bunch of companies here, Google, Skype, and YouTube, all of which have deepened her understanding of social media's impact on brain health and showcase the promise of AI and transforming mental health diagnostics interventions. She has dual PhDs in business administration and criminology. I bet she's the only one in the room with that background. No, there's somebody else? No. Okay. and has just had a relentless commitment to using AI for good. Anna, great to have you here.
Thank you, Tom. It was a little bit more than 5 years ago, but time flies. When I came back, the last time we saw each other was in Geneva. So thank you, Tom, and thank you to Stanford and our host for bringing all of us together here. And a special thank you to each of you in this room, not only because you're still here after such intense day, but because if today, this panel title is The Path from Mental Illness to Mental Health. This path requires each of you to be part of the journey. Clinician, scientist, patient, payer, as Tom has reminded us, investors, and entrepreneurs like me. So as Tom told us, my journey toward precision mental health started in a rather unexpected place because when I finished my study here, I joined WHO. And there was the very first economist hired in the Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse. I wanted to work in that department because I witnessed my mother struggle with severe depression for the moment I was born to the moment she died. Trial after trial, day after day, with no end in sight and no real improvement, honestly. And I thought, and I still believe, that there should be a better way. There should be a better way. So when I joined WHO, I work on calculating the economic burden that mental disorder bring on our society. And I ran the cost-effective analysis of the protocols that we're still using today. And in doing that, I ran at first in the problem that haunted me the most, the lack of objective and replicable measures. So that was a real problem because diagnosing and treating mental disorder felt like guesswork compared to the work that other departments at WHO were doing. And that made really difficult for mental health to sit at the same table of physical health. Tom mentioned that, right? It's different. The way mental health work, the way mental health innovate is different. So I was young. I thought I wanted to change the world. I thought that at WHO, I couldn't at that time. And so I joined the company here, high-tech company in Silicon Valley, where I had the opportunity to see the good, the bad, and the ugly of applying artificial intelligence, honestly. Because one of the team I led at YouTube was called audience development, which is a fancy, nice way to say how to get you and our kids to spend as much time as possible in front of videos. And we know that that is not the best way for our mental health. So, I was very frustrated because now I had the tools, but I was applying to make mental health worse and not better. And when I met Dr. Williams at Stanford, joining forces actually seems very natural. So together we founded EdCere. EdCere is short for two Latin words, et cerebrum, and the brain, to remind ourselves that we should start from the brain and not from the symptoms in order to address mental health. So we found that EdCere with the conviction that we can shift from a trial and error, endless system where is almost an artisan way to diagnose and treat mental health to precision mental health with predictable and curable outcome for those affected. And we use neuroimaging and artificial intelligence to do that. So how do we do that? Well, we already heard a lot of that this morning from the different speakers, but let me summarize a little bit here. So basically, imagine to walk in a standard MRI facility and get a routine scan. You get your scan, you walk out. Before we saw that it's a paradigm of about 50 minutes, so 25 minutes scan. You walk out. In 10 minutes, your doctor receives a report with your brain biotype and recommended treatment. So in less than 10 minutes, our AI platform acquired the images, the raw imaging, process them, quantify brain circuits, identify brain biotype, and match recommended treatment that are effective in less than 10 minutes. So we do that based on the Dr. Williams patents that we licensed from Stanford, and is based on all the science that you heard this morning, so I'm not going through that. But the impressive thing is the speed, right? Because AI helps us to basically turn a process that is very slow, and despite very precise, and to make that clinical grade. We don't need any special equipment in the scan room. There is no customization, and there is no requirement for special equipment that is not already there. It's just integrate with the radiology flow. So, but speed is important, but it's not the only thing that AI help us deliver to bring, to translate this research into clinical practice. In the research pipeline, to process one scan, there are 5 steps, and each steps require human intervention. Start to finish, this can count for more than 25 hours of research time for one scan. So you can understand that this is not very scalable, and it opens to human error at each steps. And so what we have done with this platform is basically compress these 5 steps in one step. We acquired the raw data from the scanner, and we get the process, identification of the brain biotype, the recommendation of effective treatment, and we deliver the report. So that again is not only speed, though that, as I remember, the system does that in less than 10 minutes. It's not only speed, is reliable, is reproducible, and is scalable. 3 things that are so important in order to translate research into clinical practice. Matching the tailoring treatment to brain biotype does not only improve outcome, it doubles remission rate, doubles. And it also cuts the times of years of trial and error in weeks of predictable outcomes. This system also allows us to do another things, to bring finally mental health at the same table of physical health. That table where I couldn't find a seat, where I was at WHO. And this is very important to try to improve also adoption, but we will talk more about that. EdSeries is a T-score, a data company. We are based on more than 6,000 standardized brain data set, and this number is growing every day. So we used this data set to basically quantify brain biotypes, to train and validate and develop foundational model to get a faster identification of effective treatment for each biotype and sub-biotype, and also to identify digital biomarker to make brain health easier to measure. Other presenter mentioned that before earlier. For example, we already identified 1 digital biomarker for the cognitive biotype that account for 1 out of 5 adults with depression. So our goal is to identify digital biomarker for each brain biotype in order to allow that scale that Tom was referring to. The benefit of using AI to translate the great research and the patent that we heard about all day long is clear, right? It's an effective way to stratify patients. Is really having a predictive system model that can match a brain biotype to effective treatment, and that allowed it turn in doubling remission rate. And also honestly open to new opportunities for drug discovery and repurposing. But let's be clear, and I go back to Tom's question. AI and data are not enough to innovate in mental health, are not enough for adoption. we need more adoption in clinical trial to really expand, and one of the audience asked about that, right? To expand the application of this standardized and reproducible method also in other populations like youth and teens. We need to work with insurers. Tom mentioned that. If it's not paid, it's not going to be adopted. And so this is what we started. Basically, even before having the FDA approval that we're working on, we start working with insurer because it's essential, especially in this market, especially in this country. Partnering with health provider and health system, Tom mentioned that, right? We need to have health providers to pilot more effective innovation, especially when innovation is grounded in science and validated like the one we are talking about. And we need education and advocacy, because without education, not even doctors are willing to embrace innovation. And without advocacy, patient will feel behind. So together we can build a better way for mental health, but we really need to work the entire ecosystem. And it's not enough to have great innovation. We need to start, as was mentioned before, we need to start from where this innovation can be adopted. Thank you.
Our final presentation is really special. Brandon Staglin is the co-founder and chief advocacy and engagement officer at OneMind. There's a lot I can say about Brandon, but I don't want to steal his time. When I started to write a book about recovery and mental health, I started with Brandon. You know, he was the first, even most of the preface of the book was about him. And because I've learned an incredible amount about both what mental illness looks like and what the people with mental illness can be like. And that for Brandon, he really more than almost anyone else has helped me to understand how people with lived experience bring something that is so vital to what we're all trying to do. Fortunately, he's had that impact in many, many places. He's served on guiding councils of global, national, regional influence, including the World Economic Forum, NIMH, the FNIH, the state of California, and Stop Stigma Together. He has a Master's of Science in Healthcare Administration, a degree in Interprofessional Leadership from UCSF, and a bachelor's degree from Dartmouth. Brandon, delighted to have you here.
Thank you, Tom, for that kind introduction. Thanks to Leanne, Williams, Lara Fullen Ross, Hosna, and the amazing team at Stanford Precision Mental Health Symposium team for putting this together. As my colleague Anna Gatti was saying a moment ago, this is also about all of you being here. Events like this don't just happen so that people can talk at other people, but so that we can actually form collaborations out of the talks that happen and move science and care forward. And so that's what I hope will come out of this event. I believe that's probably the motivations for the Stanford team putting it on. So I hope that you will have those conversations in the break that follows after this, and that science and care will be driven forward from this event, and you will be an integral part of that. So as there's an ingredient that has been touched on by some of the previous speakers, but I'd like to double down on that. One thing that one of my heroes as a teenager said, Albert Einstein, he said many famous things, but one thing that really stuck with me was the only source of knowledge is experience. Think about that for a moment. So my name is Brandon Staglin. I'm co-founder and chief advocacy and engagement officer of OneMind, as Tom so kindly introduced me in saying. As a schizophrenia survivor and co-founder of this nationally influential mental health nonprofit, I believe that all people across the mental health spectrum deserve the chance to build thriving lives. And I think you'll join me in asking, why isn't this the common outcome? The only way we can get to that outcome is for us all to be involved, including people with lived experience. So I'm going to share with you today about how to involve lived experience-based leadership in your work, whether you be a scientist or an innovator or a clinician or even somebody in the business field, to make your work more effective and engaging and to better serve the population that you aim to care for. So I hope you'll emerge from this conversation feeling empowered and excited to do this even better than you've ever done before. So our conversation today will traverse 4 stages of content. You'll learn about my experiences with the condition that I live with, as well as what I've learned from that about incorporating lived experiences into guiding mental health programs. I'll give some illustrative examples of how to do that with best practices through the One Mind Lived Experience Initiative, the program that I lead at One Mind currently. And then I'll share about, and then that'll be the extent of my talk. But there'll be time for discussion after that. So let's start the journey. So since a terrifying summer evening 35 years ago, I have lived as 15 million other Americans live today with a serious mental illness. This image shows my impression of what a psychotic episode feels like, what it felt like to me. You can probably sense the terror, the bewilderment, the chaos in my mind as I felt my identity being sucked out of me into this dark vortex of dread lying beneath my subconscious in that like 3-second span of that psychotic break. And the horror of that experience reverberated within me for the months that followed, leaving within me delusions of hellfire and damnation and driving me toward exhaustion and despair and nearly ending my life on more than one occasion. The ordeal that I faced in the months that followed were emblematic of that, of millions of people throughout our society. So not only and I was lucky, actually, I got mental health care. Not everyone gets that, as Tom so aptly said. So I had encounters with hospital staff and police officers that made me feel very self-stigmatized, like they were discriminatory, they were subjugating, and I resisted care for months after those encounters. And then once I found a psychiatrist that I could trust, we had to experiment for different medications for about 6 desperate months before finding one that could stabilize me, as has been noted by previous speakers as well. The side effects were debilitating, from chronic drowsiness to emotional blunting, which obstructed my social life and career. So I went off those medications, had a terrible relapse, had to resign from my job, go back into the psychiatric hospital, or from my graduate school admission at the time. And then I experienced chronic loneliness because I had to live close to my psychiatrist in an apartment in San Francisco for a year and a half to be able to see him twice a week. And I had no social skills to make friends with. So as I said, these are sadly common conditions for people throughout our society. Do these resonate with you? Do you know anybody who's experienced anything like this? Yeah, these are common. So fortunately, I was given the opportunity to recover. The loving support of my family, my friends, my psychiatrist, and my community has enabled me to climb back out of that dark hole and ultimately to lead One Mind organization as president for 6 years, which I stepped down from last year after making some great advances with the amazing team that I served as leader. I also advise global agency leaders such as the NIMH, me featured here with Dr. Joshua Gordon, then leading the agency, the WEF, as Tom mentioned, and others, and Stanford University's PEPNET program, which goes on today. But I learned from these experiences the power of lived experiences to elevate mental health programs and target them better at real people's needs. And this is why I'm passionate about this today. But our society needs lived experience-based leadership because we're facing a crisis of distrust and discrimination. Essentially, 2/3 of people with mental illness have avoided seeking care, either due to distrust the mental health system has their interest in mind, or to just fear of discrimination by their employers, their families, their peers. So how do we solve this terrible rift in the system? It's probably resonates with many of us here as well. We solve this rift by partnering with people with lived experiences, people who've been there to the depths and have climbed back out of that rift and can share their insights with us to improve our programs to serve that community. So this is One Mind's Lived Experience Council, the original 3 members. It's since grown to a community of about 40. We are advising leaders in business practices, in science, in innovation. One of those leaders is here with us today, Nir Eshel of Rising Star Awardee. It's at One Mind. Thank you, Nir. We've made an impact in great ways. And partnering with people with lived experience is very important because it actually enhances science and care solutions. We've learned this through our experience, and through science has shown this as well. Better solutions, better outcomes, more hope, and more acceptance for people with these conditions, as well as if you're a scientist, it really will supercharge your science. This content is sourced from my colleague Uma Chatterjee, who was on the Lived Experience Council at One Mind. It enhances your research validity. It enhances your translational relevance because you spend less time going down wrong rabbit holes and getting to the right questions to ask right away. It increases your funding competitiveness because so many funders now want you to incorporate people with lived experience into your projects, at the Wellcome Trust, for example. It builds public trust and ethical transparency. You've heard the term "nothing about us without us." If you co-create things with people with lived experience, they'll want to use it in a much greater rate. So there are practical factors to successfully do this. And this evidence is sourced from the HPGI Lived Experience Council, which I spearheaded the launch a few years ago, and our own experience with One Mind's Lived Experience Council. These factors include, when you incorporate people with lived experience into your teams, provide a welcoming setting so that people can feel that they belong and they can bring their best strengths to bear. Provide sustainable systems so that leadership has accountability to systematically listen to and incorporate the advice of your lived experience team. And supportive resources. Ensure your team has the finances and the human support to successfully incorporate lived experience-based guidance into its work. There's a lot more where this came from. I hope that you're excited now to involve people with lived experience into your work. We at One Mind are happy to help you with that journey as you go on it. Why involve people with lived experience? Brings better funding, better validity, stronger impact. When to involve us from end to end, and how to involve us? Well, practical steps exist, and we can help you with those steps. We're building a future where clinicians, scientists, and people with lived experience co-create more welcoming, compassionate, and effective mental health systems. You can be a part of it. Join us. Thank you. Let's see.
We decided to mix things up a little bit, so moderator will be on the right side this time. Questions? We've got about 10 minutes. Questions, thoughts, reflections. There are microphones here and here. Yes. And please identify yourself.
Sure. Is this on?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks very much for the insights. My name's Robbie. I'm a master's student here at Symbolic Systems. I used to work as a mental health social worker. This is a question about mental health theory, maybe. And although treatment is the ultimate goal, I think I'd be curious how maybe working in a more data-driven, prediction-driven mental health field has changed your understanding of mental health conditions themselves, or maybe the mechanisms that lead people to become depressed, for example. Or to put another way, what is the role of theory in a future mental health care, which is more reliant on AI?
Really, Tom should answer that, actually. Has literally written a book about it. Tom, you want to start?
I'll finish.
All right. I'll start, actually. I think that maybe I would just start with a challenge. I don't know that treatment's the goal. I think that I'd love to have a world in which no one needed treatments for serious mental illness. Until we get there, though, I think we have to really recognize the overall toll it takes on individuals, their family, and society. And one solution, I believe, toward destigmatization, for example, is really the reconceptualization for how we describe these diseases. And we use things like schizophrenia still, obviously not to minimize its existence. It exists. We just heard about it. I don't know that this descriptor is particularly useful. And so some of the work that Tom had led 15 years ago or more was really around moving toward, a different way of conceptualizing the diagnosis. I think prior to AI, that was not really viable. And now maybe we can move toward a data-driven, biologically based understanding and description of the diseases.
That was great.
That was
Vanna?
great. Thank you. I'll add to that a data-based, data-driven, science-driven conceptualization of diseases is essential. And a component of that science has to be the qualitative science that goes into understanding how people experience those conditions and how it affects their lives. So going beyond the symptoms, the actual phenomenology, and then how that translates into life potential. Like, is somebody able to go to school or go to work? I mean, if their negative symptoms prevent them from making good relationships in the workplace, are they going to be able to stay there? So often people wash out of workplace settings because their symptoms prevent them from interacting with others in a way that others can understand. So addressing things like that will be essential to improving the treatments to get to where they need to be.
Anna, anything to add?
Well, I think that we really have a unique opportunity to rethink, in a way, rewrite the way we are looking at mental health, because finally we can measure. We have no excuse, right? No more excuse. I think we have been a little bit of prisoner of our own story. And despite we have even a little bit earlier than today, the opportunity to be more data-driven, we followed a storytelling that brought us not close to data. And today, with this real focus on AI, I think that AI is going to be the enabler, or hopefully, I hope that AI is going to be the enabler to embrace a more data-driven approach and to bring really mental health at par with physical health. Because the storytelling, the words really had an impact on how mental health has been treated, has been considered. So I'm very hopeful. I think that data will help to clear the way.
It's such an interesting question historically, because for so many decades, this was all about theory and not about data. And now we're in a moment where that's flipping over. The only thing I'd add to what we've been talking about all day is that I think where AI is going to take us is not only with a better way of using brain data and biological data, but it will get us a lot more precision for behavior, emotion, activity, behavior, the things that actually we're supposed to be experts about in behavioral science. It's going to give us the kind of precision on those measures that we've really been lacking. So I think these were great answers, though. Thank you. Over here.
Yes. Hi, my name is Lynn. I work with NAMI as part of their peer support program. So your presentation on lived experience really resonated with me. And I definitely think it's important to have people with lived experience involved in research. The question I had is, outside of lived experience, there's also a very dark history of medical research, non-consensually experimenting on people, especially from minority groups. So how would you recommend getting people to engage with that history in mind?
Thank you. Thank you for calling that out. That's a very important thing to recognize. Yeah, that some awful things have happened in society with marginalized groups in science. I think that could be a part of the source of distrust that exists today. I'm sure that it is. So I think one way to start to do that is to incorporate peers in that process. So people who are currently involved in research and have lived with a mental health condition, or may even be scientists themselves and living with a mental health condition, could serve as champions or ambassadors amongst communities of people with lived experience, including those in marginalized groups, especially if they're identified with that community themselves. I'd love to hear your ideas as well. Perhaps we could talk afterward. But it's a very important question. But that's one suggestion that I have for that. Any other ideas?
Yeah, I would just add that I think one of the values of NAMI has been to remind us that people with mental illness are also a marginalized group. And we don't usually think of it that way, but it may be an important reframing in an era where we care about equity, that they've really been left out of the conversation. Let's go on. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to make sure we get in some of these questions.
Hello, everyone. My name is Adriana, and I'm a high school senior. So I don't really have a question, but I really wanted to bring like an insight. So over the summer, I was an intern at the Autism Lab, and I was working with Dr. Hegarty. And one of the things that we really were talking about was, of course, we're developing these strategies and these treatments personalized, but we also tend to forget about acceptance and about how stigmatization is all because it's there because there are people who have this negative viewpoint on people on the spectrum. And so I just wanted to bring like an insight to that and about how we should probably like open our eyes to being more accepting. And that's something that has been missing for a very long time. And I think Lynn, I don't know if that was her name, but she was talking about how research has had the power to both like empower ideas, but also bring the stigma towards groups, especially with autism. And so I just really wanted to bring like an awareness to that. And I wanted to thank our panelists today for being such open and giving all these beautiful insights. So thank you. Not really a question, but more of an insight. Thank you.
Thank you. May I respond to that? Thank you. Very important insight. Thank you for calling that out. Yeah, stigma is actually worse today for serious mental illnesses than it was 10 years ago. It's hard to believe, but it's true. And something that must be addressed to help more people seek the care they can benefit from, to re-engage in life again, to reconnect with their communities. A sense of belonging is essential to be a thriving human being. And at 1-1 we have a lived experience community, as I mentioned earlier, and we're looking for new members as well to add to that. If you're somebody with direct personal experience or a family member, we gave a great presentation at one of our organization's large convenings of business leaders. Our council did this, and the business leaders changed their perception of mental illness completely by hearing from us and seeing what we're capable of. That's one example of contact education, which has been shown to be very effective at reducing stigma. But we'll love to talk with you about that, who just spoke later. I would love to hear your insights.
This is why it's just so important to have you on so many of these panels. We need to clone you, and I guess you're trying to do that. But your voice is just absolutely critical for this conversation. We don't have much time. Let's take one more question, and then we're going to have to go on to the next session.
Thanks. Chris Buckle, formerly with Elevance Health, actually. Very interesting to get the panel's perspective on how we increase adoption in clinical trials and adoption of these new technologies. I understand a lot more from the physical health side, but mental health is unique. Why are we not seeing more engagement in those later stage clinical trials? And how do we get that greater adoption for these really innovative technologies?
Well, just looking around to see if Jonathan was still here. I don't know. I'm a PhD, not an MD, so that's my disclaimer. I don't know if there's enough humility in the current healthcare profession to accept new ways of thinking or doing. That's my opinion. I think you saw that reflected in some of the data where doctors with ChatGPT do worse than ChatGPT alone. I think that tells you something. I think the second part is something that Tom's talked about, is it's an incentive structure. So we have to recognize that people need to get paid. If you're going to change their workflow, they should be paid for the change in that workflow. So that does come back to a payer system. So those 3 A's that I talked about, approval, access, and adoption, they're all interrelated.
Other,
Yeah, I totally agree with what you just said. I mean, it's difficult to find a door open for a new way of thinking, and so I think that probably a tactical way to promote adoption of innovation is really making sure that it's not too disruptive. So, we talk a lot about disruptive innovation, and we talk about that with very positive connotation, but that makes everything even more difficult to adopt, right? So I think this field require gradual adoption and making sure that innovation is as much as integrated in processes that are already there, and is not too disruptive, because as you were saying, maybe there isn't enough humility to be very open to innovation.
that may be a good note to end on. Thank you very much to our panel and to our audience. Thank you.
Thank you for such an inspiring and powerful conclusion to today's presentations. Please join me in a final round of applause for this incredible panel. You've really given us vital, hopeful, and actionable vision for the future of precision mental health, and the importance of integrating people who have lived with these experiences. Now we bring our symposium's discussions to a close, and it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Dr. Rebecca